the age of 19 or 20, I had a massive breakdown. I dealt with shame, my addiction to porn, my hiding of any sexuality, the projection on men. Men need to be non-emotional, they need to be strong, they need to be providers. What is the embodied masculine?
There's still this tinge of men should be men, and men should provide, lead, be strong, and women should be soft, gentle, open.
There are multiple levels of men being disconnected from this feminine source. If we don't have that capacity to be able to hold our own emotions, our own sexuality, our own anger, our own rage, then we definitely can't do that for a woman.
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life, so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers, and today's episode is one of those deep episodes that unfolds from two men who are talking about topics that they're really passionate about. We're talking about men and the healing for men, the integration for men of really coming into their own masculine, coming into their own feminine, and how that helps with creating beautiful, sacred relationships that facilitate healing of our partners, of their inner masculine, their inner feminine, and really making the world a better place. If I put that into the whole podcast episode to a nutshell, that would be it. We talk about the importance of kind of ancestral scripts, right, and wounds, and we kind of get in. Niall's a wonderful man. He's based out in Ireland, and we talk about actually how that comes through in the Irish lineages and the stories that Irish men have, and we talk about some of what I received as being a Black Jamaican man. As well, we talk about sexual shame and how that shows up. We talk about the need men have for nurturing and how we outsource that to women and how that's detrimental to our relationships. We talk about, how women can heal the feminine within themselves and heal their inner masculine as well. We talk about the importance of growing in our capacity to hold the energy of our own emotions, our partner's emotions, our sexual energy, and why that is the work for men. Really is the deepest work for men to do. And we talk about some of my own relationship stuff that's gone on, my path with me and also, and some of what's really worked for us, and how we've ducked and weaved in this kind of masculine, feminine, and where we kind of started out when we met and how that's shifted over time. And I'll give some really great examples of his own journey, through yoga and how that's really brought him into self-healing, self-nurturing as well. And he talks about a program that he has coming up on the 2nd of September, which is all about coming into your kingship, and becoming whole and wholesome, right? Whole and wholesome, I think is the best way to put it. So really go and check that out. All his links are in the show notes as well. And yeah, this is a really beautiful episode. You're going to love this. You're going to absolutely love this. And you're going to want to share it with someone. So I'm going to ask you to do that. If you enjoy the episode, share it. And if you also could, just give it a rating as well on Spotify and wherever people rate stuff, right? Spotify and what's the other place? Apple Music. That would be, Apple Podcasts, sorry. That would be really useful to me. And I'll just finish up by saying, if you are kind of an avoidant leaning man and you're listening to this, You can see where you're fearful of commitment, fearful to express your emotions, struggle with emotional intimacy, hyper independent. I have a program just for you, and that's kicking off in mid-September. So again, the link will be in the show notes for that. You can check that out. But I'll stop there and let you jump into the episode. Welcome, listeners. Welcome back to another wonderful episode. And what are we going to talk about? We don't know, do we? This is always the way, and my editors may edit this out, but we're going to have a wonderful conversation because for today's guest, we've come for a recommendation of a past guest, but actually someone I also bumped into on a call with one of John Weiland's group calls that we were both on, and we've had some conversations across Instagram. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation, also based on what we just talked about for the last half an hour before we jumped on. I have tonight with the wonderful man, Niall Graham. How are you doing, Niall?
I'm good. Thank you, David, for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this chat and see what happens. As we've just talked about, I don't really know what's going to happen here.
Yeah. The unfolding of podcasting. And there's this weird thing because actually at the beginning, there's going to be an intro, and I would have added the intro onto the beginning of this. So by the time the listeners listen to this, they actually know what we're going to talk about. It's a bit like time travel in a strange way, isn't it? So the question I love to ask everybody first, because I think this is really important I feel like it frames the conversation really well, is like, what was your journey into the world to doing the work that you do today?
Good question. Well, there's two kind of answers to that, because specifically I work with men at the moment. So at the age of 19 or 20, I had a massive breakdown, and it lasted for about 3 months. And at the time, it was a neighbor of ours who introduced me to this idea of the pendulum. It was like a piece of string with a weight on the bottom. And I started doing this thing. But I think it opened up something in me. I think at the time I was looking for something because I was brought up in a religious family. And so I think I was just quite depressed and quite like stuck down. So he introduced this idea, and something happened in my psyche. Something exploded. So for 3 months, I went through this mad experience of like synchronicity. Lots of random things happened. And I've spoken about this before. It kind of culminated where I ended up in my house having writing all over the wall. I painted the ceiling like blue with white clouds. I had a green carpet, and I had deciphered the English language into 3 letters, I, O, and C. So A was broken down into 3 intersecting I's, and B was I and 2 C's. So this went on for like a number of days where I was like breaking down the English language. So it took me, I actually woke up one morning and it was gone, it was finished, and I had no idea what had happened. I just knew that I had broken through something. So I think on reflection, like some people would say that was a bipolar episode. I was obviously very high, but it was a mentor years later, and he reframed it to me. He said, that sounds to me like an initiation. And that really helped me just to frame it a little bit better, because I think that I had been worried about my mental health. Now, at the time, I was fortunate enough that my parents weren't really into psychiatry or anything like that as a way of kind of, medicating me or whatever. But if I had been in another situation, that definitely would have happened. But it was an opening. It was a breaking out or a breaking down. And again, I had another one at the age of about 27 or 28, where this time was very different. It was more about, I just reached this real deep state of intimacy with self. And I had never experienced this before. I knew exactly who I was internally, and I had this deep sense of intimacy with all of life. So I feel like these were kind of 2 pivotal moments in my life, but they really shaped my understanding that there was so much more to life than what I had experienced or what we've been taught. And I suppose so I'm 45 years old now. So for the last 25 years has really been through different practices, through different like mediums, like first starting off doing yoga and breathwork and so on, of kind of putting those pieces back together about what did I experience, what way does life work. And yeah, it was about when I was about 35 years old, I did the initiation with the Mankind Project, and that just started me on the journey of what is it to be a man. And I was kind of integrating both these aspects. So it's been a huge, long journey, and as with all of these, and I'm sure you recognize this, the deeper we go, the more the more mad it gets, or the less, the more difficult it becomes to understand. But that's been my journey, and it was a real commitment when I was 20 years old to understand as much as I could about what it was to be a human. Like, that's the kind of simplicity, is what is it to be a human? And that's kind of shaped and I've reached points in my life where I'm just like, fuck this, I don't want to do this anymore. But I still come back to that commitment that I made when I was 20 years old. I was like, I want to know everything about what it is to be a human. So yeah, in short, that's kind of a brief description of how I came here.
Wow, that's quite a commitment. What is it to be a human? That's a huge question to decipher and like attempt to experience, because there's so much experience to have to start to work out, like, what is it to be a human? Being a human, I'm living in London as a human, you're over in Ireland as a human. Like, that's two slightly different experiences of human being. And then you can add in that tinge that's like being a man human being. That's a whole experience that you have. And maybe you'll never have the experience of being a woman. So you have to be with the experience of knowing you'll never have that experience as that type of human being, but trying to still understand that experience as well.
Yeah. And definitely, I think the reason that I ended up like becoming more interested in like what is it to be a true man is because a lot of my experiences, especially I did yoga for 10 years and I got up at 4 a.m. for a long time. So I really felt my body. I really understood the body, and I was like, well, this is the vehicle that I have, and I could feel myself internally. I could feel like my genitals. I could feel like what it was to have masculine energy. So that became a really clear kind of framework. It's like, and also I started to get interested in the idea of polarity as well, that men and women are different, because I've gone through different stages in my life. I don't know if you can relate to this, of like sometimes feeling that men and women are more similar and other times feeling that men and women are like completely different beings, And so I think that it was important then for me to kind of just hone in on what is it to be a man. And like the bigger picture of that is like, it also led me into bigger questions of like, there's a lot of question at the moment is like of men and culture, and there's a lot of like ideas of toxic masculinity and patriarchy and so on. And so I was like, well, if men are being so targeted, maybe for good reason, like I don't think men have acted particularly well over the years in terms of power and how men have shown up in the world. But I also believe that on the whole, like, men are the ones who cause this mess. And I also believe quite firmly that we are the ones that should try and fix this thing as well. That we have a responsibility as men, and like, of course, I'm an individual from a long lineage of ancestry, but I do believe that the masculine is that part of us, whether that's in men or women, that has the ability to be able to change things, And so that feels really important as a man, as a being who has masculine energy, to use that in right ways, not only for myself, not only for my family, but also for culture. So that's kind of why I was more interested in the men part.
It's not too dissimilar for myself. Actually, like when I was in my 20s, I had this thing, was like, I want to experience life. I want to experience life. Like, what's life? And I want to experience it. Because I grew up, both my parents were born and raised in Jamaica and came here in the 70s. And what I observed from them was that they were scared to live a lot of life because of the experiences they experienced when they first came to the UK, come to London, England. But also because of like the religious upbringing that they had, that a lot of life was like, wrong and sinful and so forth. And I was like, no, I'm not on board with that. Or a lot of the things that life had to offer, they were like, no, you can't do that. It's not safe. So I started to experience life and everything from food, I think, is a wonderful way into experiencing life, because food is always baked into culture, and culture is also baked into superstition, and it's also baked into history. Like when I always think of like when I think of is there's certain religions where they don't eat shellfish, right? And if I remember rightly from my Muslim friends, they're not really meant to eat shellfish, or they don't. We're very clear that Muslims don't eat pork, and I was like, well, it would make sense if you're from the Middle East, which is a very hot region of the world, to not eat something that can go off quite quickly and quite in heat, right? So is that why Muslims don't eat pork? Is that because they've just baked that into their religion to keep people safe? So I have this kind of theory about this, and I'm sure Muslims will get on and tell me I'm completely wrong. But to experience life, and then I started to experience a lot of life, and then I started to see, oh, as a man, my experiences can be very different from a woman's, and I did a bit of a journey through like the dating scene and pickup and all that kind of world. And as I kind of got into my 30s, and I'm interested to see what your experience of this was like, as I started to coach people, and I coach women sometimes as well, I started to see that really the difference between men and women is ultimately the conditioning that we receive about how men and women should be. At its core, time and time again, I see through coaching men and coaching women is they come up with the same fears, anxieties, desires, and wants. The difference is that the cultural conditioning they receive as women and as men mean that the way they express those fears and anxieties and so forth come out differently and are seen differently in the world. But at its core, it's the same, not necessarily mechanisms, but it's the same kind of worries and fears and anxieties that we have. And obviously there's some slight differences, but for the most part, that's what my experience has been.
Definitely. And I think it's really helpful to recognize those, in men in Ireland, for instance, and you brought in the cultural aspect of this. So culturally, then we will also inherit different wounds from that place. I'm sure in Jamaica, then especially coming from a religious family, that there would be a particular nuance. And that's something that I just had to learn over time, like being brought up in a religious family, but also being brought up in Ireland, that, the shame piece is just a really big part that we have to deal with. I can't really avoid it here, And that brings us on to like the church, it brings us on to colonization, it brings us on to the history, So it's like this, the ecology of who we are as humans is not based on like our own particular wounding. But then being able to track those like major wounds, the not good enough man, or the useless Irish male, or the drunkard, or the little boy, and that, as you say, we're kind of dealing with these like 6 or 7 main wounds in people, and if we can, as you say, we can like really distill it down to these 6 or 7 wounds. And for women, then, but I also think like the ancestry and the history and the culture is such a major impact in this. For instance, I think with women, a lot of their work is around like inhabiting the body and being seen and being heard. And the being seen and being heard piece is because the feminine was eradicated, because women were shoved out of society and were shut down. And so that ancestral wound then carries on through the line where we now, if our ancestors, our mothers, our grandparents haven't like dealt with these wounds, then we as men and women then inherit these wounds. And we're kind of doing this work not only for ourselves, but also for our ancestors, So I think it is helpful, and also it does take a little bit of time. I know for me, it does take a little bit of time, but I suppose with the men that I work with, there's like 3 or 4 things. Sexual shame is kind of number 1 in Ireland that I'm dealing with. Is there one that you feel like is number 1 in the men that you work with?
It's interesting you say sexual shame in Irish men, because I've had some Irish clients, and it's so pervasive, right? The sexual shame around any sort of sexuality. It's just so, I guess it's one of those things. It's just so, in the men that I've worked with who are Irish, it's just like so pervasive. I would say that the men that I continually work with, the core wound that comes up again and again is not being good enough, not getting it right, making mistakes, which is all kind of a deviation, kind of comes from the not enoughness and how they respond to that. And I think that's really fascinating to me, because the not enoughness, you kind of, most people think, oh, someone's not enough. They're going to, they're going to struggle in life. They're not going to make effort in life. They're going to like fail at things and capitulate and crash and burn. But I've got a lot of clients who are like that. But I've got clients who are on the complete opposite end, who are incredibly successful, set up multiple businesses and made lots of money doing that and had lots of material, worldly success. But in the aim of trying to prove that they are enough, and they come to some point often in their life where it's like they can't understand why they don't feel enough. They are absolutely at a loss because they've done everything that quote unquote society told them they need to do to be a good man, to feel enough. And yet they still have this, what I often call the void. It's like this emptiness that they feel, and they've tried to fill it up with all the things that the world tells them they need to do to be a good man, and they still feel this emptiness and void.
And it's really interesting. I'm not sure who spoke about this. Maybe it's Gabor Mate, but whenever we receive trauma, that's when duality kicks in. So either we go into, so in the case of maybe the good enough wound, that we either go into collapse, we're like, oh, I can't do anything, nothing's going to be good enough, or we go into the more active part of that, which is I'm going to prove myself to the world, do you know? But we still have to come back to that wound at some points, and I really feel in Ireland that wounding just really takes people down again. Like there's not that active aspect of that wound. It's more like collapse. John Minen talks about this, the collapsing. And how do we stay open in those moments when that not good enough wound comes up? And I think it's and I think that's the beauty of wounding in some ways, like that we really can, when we become aware of it, we can really use it as a catalyst for what we really want. But at some point, as you say, with those men that you're speaking about, at some point you got to deal with the wound. You can't get away from it.
Yeah. And I guess with the wound of sexual shame, I imagine in a society where everyone feels the sexual shame, where everyone's experiencing some level of sexual shame, because it's not just going to be the men, it's going to most likely be the women as well. It's very easy for, and again, I guess it's kind of a question. I'm imagining it's very easy for men to be like, oh, well, this is just how it is for everybody. This is how it is. There's no other option or choice.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's the beauty of like spending time. And like I lived in England for 10 years. And as you say, like growing up in Ireland, that's just the way it was. I dealt with shame, my addiction to porn, my hiding of any sexuality, like my freeze when it came to women. Like I just didn't know how to speak to women. Like I had such a lack of confidence. But there was also like, that was almost just normal in Irish culture. For me anyway, in school, it was just very normal to see. We just weren't very good with each other, with dating. And so I didn't know anything else. And then whenever I went to England, and I thought about this for a long time, living in England for 10 years, I got to see a masculinity that I had never experienced in Ireland. Like my dad is a subordinate to my mum. My mum is very much domineering. So there's a kind of a stereotype within our family where we have this very strong domineering mother. I have 3 sisters. And then there's a subservient father. So he was my representation of what the masculine was, from a very young age. And then experiencing this, because for me, like shame was part of the colonial strategy for men in Ireland. If you look back at the penal law, I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but at the time, whenever the penal laws were introduced by the UK, there was depictions of Irish people just as being drunkards, as being stupid and useless. And they were illustrated like in the British tabloids as a way of systemically shaming Irish men. And so, as we know with shadow, like whenever that is put on us, then we internalize that. So we have our own internal critic. We have our own internal shaming of ourselves. So then that just, it's insipid. It feeds into culture and it becomes part of the collective field within Ireland, So we have an entire culture that's shamed by another country. And this is not to lay blame or anything. It's really just about being pragmatic and saying this is how it was and this is what we're having to deal with. Like, I think it's been really important in Ireland for us to step out of the victim mentality of like, this is what was done to us, and say, okay, well, yes, this was what was done to us and this is what we do about it, you know. And I think that that's true for everyone. Every man who grows up comes to the point of go like, okay, I'm going to stop blaming people now, but I need to sort myself out. And as a nation, I feel like Ireland is doing more of that now, just standing up and going like, okay, we need to deal with this stuff. So coming back to what you were originally talking about, it's in the field in Ireland. And I know for myself, even having done a lot of healing, it comes into me. Like at the moment I'm staying at my parents' place and you can feel it in the air. I can feel it in the undertones of conversation, and it's normalized. It's people don't know any better. And sometimes I have the energy to be able to say something, but to try and like reprogram an entire generation or an entire country is really difficult because we're completely unaware of it, you know? And that's why being in the UK really supported me, because I got to see what I would consider more healthy men, more healthy masculinity, like masculine men in England who are willing to like, you know, stand up for themselves, say who they were. And it's been quite difficult actually coming back to Ireland and to be able to hold on to that. It's been an entire journey in my own self of like tending to my wounds while also like feeling the potential of who I can be and who I was when I lived in another place because of the collective field, do you know?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Or do you want to respond to that first?
No, I have a feeling what question you're going to ask me, but please ask the question.
Yeah, I'm just interested, like, because you have two aspects, because you were brought up in the UK, but you also have the Jamaican, and I'm just interested in your relationship. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, because, you know, I have gone out my way to study history over the years. Some through my travels, but also because of choice, right? So what most people don't understand, for instance, and we watched this documentary, who's it by? It's one of the newsreaders. I can't remember what his name is. I can see his face. It's a black newsreader. And we were at my mum's a few... Trevor
McDonald. No, I'm literally throwing in names. I'm sorry.
No, it's a different news presenter. It's a younger one. And he happened to be Jamaican. He's born in Jamaica and raised in the UK. And he went back to Caribbean. There's a whole documentary about looking over different parts of mainly Jamaica and some of the other islands there. And we watched it one afternoon. And obviously my partner, she's Swedish. So she only has a limited understanding of Jamaican history through me. And in the documentary, he talks about the relationship of Irish to Jamaicans. Right, because in the times of slavery, the Irish were brought over to Jamaica, and they were only slightly above the average Jamaican or slaves at the time, right? Because the British was still, the English British really was still kind of oppressing the Irish, and the Irish would sometimes be oppressing the slaves, but it wasn't always that way from how I've heard it. Now, the reason why I touch on that is because simultaneously, there's also this depiction of what black people are like, or Africans in general, right? There's this kind of, you know, we can go back to the books of Tintin, or even if you go back as close as, say, the 1950s, 1960s, some of the propaganda that came out of political organizations, right? There's a wonderful book by Andrew Marr called The Modern History of Britain, and he talks about this, where when Caribbean started moving to Notting Hill, I think it was a Conservative Party, or they would have been known as a Tory Party, I think back then. They put out leaflets into people's homes. And what the leaflets said was that to hide your wives and daughters because the black men, they have a ferocious sexual appetite and your wives will not be safe. And why I mention this is kind of off the back of what you said, is that there's like, you have this projected experience of what you're like as a black man that comes from outside of you. So, you know, if we go back in the days of slavery, when the British first went over to Africa, they just saw black people as savages because, you know, they didn't wear much clothes and they didn't dine in the same way. They ate with their hands, all these sorts of things, right? And what we're seeing is this perpetuation of savagery, sexual savagery, or general lack of civilization that is perpetuated through history, right? All the way until now, because if we look at even the riots that were happening last week in the UK, is this idea of a lack of understanding of law and order, savagery, and kind of sexual ferociousness, which still perpetuates into the idea of masculinity. And then if I just add in, this is a big add in, like I grew up with all this kind of dancehall music, reggae music, not so much reggae, more dancehall. And it's very sexualized. So I had this experience of both being, you know, British man, but being a black British man, being Jamaican man. So there's these ideas of what a black man's like. He's very charming. He wants to have lots of sex. The women love him, like all these things. So those things were both projected onto me as the picture of what being a good man was, because I didn't really have much of a role model in terms of men in my life, because my father was somewhat absent, but more absent through being an empty vessel. Less than he was around physically, not necessarily living with us because my parents were separated, but he was not too far away in distance, but from an emotional point of view and from a support point of view, he wasn't really there because he didn't receive that either. So I understand when you say there's this kind of collective field that gets projected onto you, and then we kind of embody that because it's what's projected onto us. The rest of the world sees that as who you are. And then you have to kind of break free of that, which is, you know, was also my experience. It was like, oh, wait a minute, growing up and just getting validation through sex all through my 20s. And then suddenly kind of getting into my 30s and being like, this is really toxic. Why am I doing this? And seeing like, oh, like, do I want to sleep around those and those? Or, oh, I'm afraid of relationships. Why am I afraid of relationships? Because my dad told me all these things about relationships being bad. But what's the history of this? Why does no one know how to father in my lineage, you know? And you can trace things back to this history, which is either oppressively put on or just very covertly put on through messaging, through drawings, through leaflets, and the way in which we have to then embody something different, but then we're still in the same family systems, the sort of cultural systems. And now we've got this kind of social media systems as well around us, and you're kind of butting up against it and trying to change the system, but it's so hard because that has so much weight. So you kind of, how you do that becomes a real, a difficult art in many ways.
Absolutely. I'm just, yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this in a way, you know, because I even just feel the weight just in terms of what you're talking about, you know, because I'm sure you've seen the signs, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, you know. There's a commonality. I'm sure you know yourself, those posters that we're seeing on pub doors in England, like no blacks, no Irish, and no dogs, you know. And that really just, it impacts people. It's that field that we are shaped by. And exactly what you're saying is like, how do we hold ourselves? Like, how do we do our healing while still being in environments that's still present, you know? And also just for normal people living in the UK or normal people who maybe haven't been impacted in this way, there's also been some other projection put on them as well, you know? So, like coming back to what you were saying before, like the projection on men need to be non-emotional. They need to be strong. They need to be providers. And again, so that's another layer of projection that's put on men. And how women, it's okay for women to cry. It's okay for them to show emotion, but you can't show anger. You can't stand up for yourself, you know? So it's like these layers and layers of how culture impacts us. And I think, like, just to kind of move on a little bit from this, I think this is where the embodiment piece, which I know that you are interested in this as well. What is the embodied masculine? Because when we start to do the healing within the body, then we're coming from this true sense of what it is to be a man. And then we're not kind of trying to navigate our way through how we've been taught we should be by society, how we've been projected on because of our race, because of our nationality. And we really start to come into some true sense of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. And that's what I'm really interested in, that when we're really doing the shadow work and we're coming into the body, that we are able to navigate into that space of, well, this is how it feels to be a man. And that's what I was really interested in through all those years. It's like doing yoga and feeling that internal masculine coming online and feeling that connection to the internal feminine a little bit more. And then I was able to kind of stand up in those environments and not be like, it's impossible not to be affected by the environment. And I think, I follow a lady called Dr. Rocio Rosales Metza, and she talks about the decolonization of therapy, that colonization is everywhere, and that it's just in the psyche. So by doing anything in the world where we have the potential of subscribing into that mindset, and it's just so difficult to be able to step out of that. So we're all impacted by this thing, So yeah, that's what I have. I've gone on a bit of a tangent.
No, there was something you said in there around the kind of the feeling the masculine energy in the body. And, I know we follow many of the same people in the world of polarity, and what we're kind of seeing a lot is this, as a field, people are talking about polarity and there's the divine masculine, divine feminine. It's coming across as something that's quite evolved, that's gone beyond the kind of men are like this and women are like that. But we kind of mentioned this before we jumped on recording, but there's still this tinge of men should be men and men should provide, lead, be strong, and women should be soft, gentle, open, and delicious. Do you think there's something missing in this kind of subtle message? Because it's not overt, it's a subtle message that's happening in a lot of the polarity teachings we're seeing.
Yeah. I can speak to the last relationship that I was in, because I had just met, or I just come across John's teachings like a couple of years before. And it was also just like part of my own understanding of what it is to be a man. So I went into that relationship very much with this mindset of, I want to be this man and I want to show up in a certain way. I want to be able to like communicate well. I want to be able to like lead the relationship and so on. But there was, after a while of doing that, I just felt quite a lot of stress and a lot of strain. And what I also realized in that relationship was that I still was looking to her for a lot of things. And what transpired in the end was like, it was very much a lot of mother wounds of everything that I hadn't received from my own mother, because this lady was a mother, she had a child, and she was just very feminine, very nurturing and very beautiful. And so all those wounds came to the surface for me because as a child, I hadn't received that nurturing, and I was listened to someone recently and they were talking about Irish mothers. Like, Irish mothers were very functional. They fed us, they clothed us, but they weren't very good nurturers. They weren't very good actual mothers in some ways. And I really related to that. And so that's what was coming up in the relationship with her, around the mothering, and really seeing that there were parts of myself that I abdicated towards her, and that I needed her to be able to let me drive the car. I needed her to be able to let me do some stuff around the house, because that's how I felt like a man. Mm. And so there were aspects of the relationship that I needed her to be able to let me do things so I would feel like a man. And I was putting expectation on her to be a certain way because she was a woman. And so it ended up being quite unhealthy. Like, we lasted for about, a year and a half, 2 years. But I came out of the relationship going like, fuck, I really need, it's been a long, long journey for me going back to my 20s, where I'm like knowing this mother wound, but never really tending to it. And maybe I can speak to just some of the main things that in terms of the feminine, that I feel like were necessary. So for me, I didn't have a connection to my own self-love. I didn't have a connection to my own sense of nurturing. Like, I was quite practical. If I'm on my own, like, I'll do shit. I'll go for a walk, or I'll go for a cycle, or I'll watch TV. But I'm not very good at like having baths, or like really taking care of myself, or like soaps, oils, any of those sort of things. And I will kind of be functional in terms of food. I will make food. Sometimes I will go the extra mile to make food for myself, because I'm single at the moment. And a large part of this has been like the remothering part for me, is like really coming into that place of tending to myself, loving myself, taking care of myself. And also, like, I looked to her a lot for intimacy, because I didn't have any intimacy in my own body. I didn't know what it was like to be intimate with myself. And so it also led to, you know, in the relationship that I was always looking to her for intimacy, that I was always looking to her, like if I was feeling anxious in my heart or I was feeling emotionally anxious, then I would look to her. And I've seen this also put out sometimes before. It's like a man will ask a woman if she's okay whenever he's not feeling okay. So this kind of anxiousness, I was in this kind of cycle of anxiousness with her. And so, as I said, I left that relationship. I did initiation with Noble Man, which was an initiation of 25 women, hold space for like 19 men to go through this initiation. And yes, it did a little bit of work. It was really mostly working with the mother wound. And it did a little bit of work around the mother wound. I was able to shout and scream and tell my mother to fuck off and all this sort of stuff. But it was actually in the same way that I feel about my own masculinity. It was actually the day-to-day taking care of myself, connecting in with my heart. And the biggest piece for me was connecting in with the earth. And I think this is just really very much part of like the bigger picture of how I see it. Like men who have bad relationships with their mothers, don't have good relationships with women, and haven't kind of done this healing with their own inner feminine, we're also disconnected from the earth. So it's like there are multiple levels of men being disconnected from this feminine source. I think for women who are in their bodies, like obviously women can inhabit some of this like unhealthy masculine as well, but they have a ground like within their bodies. Then there's an almost automatic connection to the feminine. And so for men, I feel like we're double screwed because we're in male bodies. We're in a patriarchal society. We're in a society that has been disconnected from nature, from earth. And I think it's really much harder for men to find that nurturance. And either we look for that outside of ourselves in women, or some of us may have been fortunate enough to have that, within our own mothers. But for me, the key piece of this is going back to the land, going back to earth. And I think that this was always part of the original initiations, was men always came back. This is what the sweat lodges were. It was men going back to the mother, the great mother. And I think that's been the biggest healing piece for me, is finding, like working through in Ireland, working through the shame around my sexuality and finding the ground in my own body, finding the connection to earth myself. And that's where the deepest relaxation ever came in for me. Because doing that work of coming back to earth, coming back to that connection with the great mother, I was able to do my own healing around my own heart. I was able to love myself in a way that my mother never loved me. And it's changed my relationship with women now. I don't need women in the same way. I'm no longer texting women. I definitely feel, I think a lot of us are coming to this point now of choosing partners as opposed to going on dates or having sex with people just because we feel a lack of something. And we really don't want to be in that place as men now. We really want to be doing enough healing that we're really making choices in relationship, that we're committing to people that really feel good for us, Because again, coming back to what we were talking about before, there's the narratives of like, you need to find, for years, they've given up on me now, but like, do you have a girlfriend? And so then there's a pressure from society because it's just like normal, for people to do that. And, I was the freak for 15, 20 years. They've really got over that now. But we end up in situations where we're falling into cultural traps, but not coming from, a genuine desire. And the irony of all this is like the more healing that we do, we end up doing the same things anyway. We end up choosing partners, we end up having kids, and we end up getting married. But we do that from a conscious place. And that's kind of the major piece for me. But I feel like the big part of my healing and the big part of like what I'm doing in this offering that I have in September is about really men coming back to that wholeness in themselves, which includes the earth, which includes connecting to our heart, which includes connecting to our own sex, our own sexuality. because the feminine, the loss of feminine society is all of that. A disconnection from our own compassion, a disconnection from our own pleasure, and a disconnection from earth. And that's why I feel like men are really struggling these days, because there's so many reasons for us not to be connected to the fundamental part of us, which is our own inner nurturance and understanding that we are humans in a human body having a human experience, and the beauty of the body, as opposed to if we're not producing, or we're not like making money, or we're not successful, that we're not valid. That drives so many men into unhealthy situations, you know. But if we find that in ourselves, we go through that relationship, developing that relationship with the feminine, whether that be earth, whether that be partner, whether that be inner feminine, which is ultimately always about inner feminine, that we really start to make healthy choices in life.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
And like I heard, amen. I want to, I spent a lot of time in church when I was a young man, and those words, amen.
So did I.
come out in different ways.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. But, something I heard you saying there, you didn't say the words, was like through sourcing, looking to your partner for earthing and grounding. It's like you're looking for a connection to that source energy, that energy of the earth that nourishes you through her. So it's like plugging into her to like not hijack, but like to siphon off the energy that she gets by being naturally connected. And, Prue, you kept talking there and saying various amazing things, but it's like, that's what so many men are doing, is that we are
absolutely,
we desire this energy, this nurturance, as you put it, like, oh, I want to feel nurtured, right? I want to feel this feminine energy, but we still trapped in the kind of traditional tropes of like, oh, but a man doesn't do that. Even if we have evolved really far and we've gone really far, and we might find ourselves in some of these polarity teachings that are really still saying, be more of a man, right? There's some great teachers out there that talk about the importance of feminine energy and feminine personal work for men, but there's more that are just pushing the message of being more and more masculine. But actually, what I hear you saying there is this importance for men of like creating practices and structure for themselves to, instead of sourcing that feminine energy from the women that they meet, or chasing money, I think is a very standard man thing to do, to kind of source feminine energy, because the money, but they believe that getting the money will lead to women, which will lead to them getting the feminine energy. But actually sourcing that themselves by, everything from, and it sounds, some of this self-love stuff can sound really like fluffy and like, for the man who's very functional and like, can feel very like silly, like, oh, why do I need to have baths? I don't like baths. I like showers, for instance, he might say. But actually there's a slowness and sensuality to that helps us slow down and come, like, tune into our inner knowing, our intuition, our feeling and our emotions. And then the piece you said about the heart, which is this compassion and empathy, which is so lacking, is the thing that we keep saying for men, is like, we need to think more and be more compassionate. But actually, in my work, what I see is so many men lack compassion and empathy for themselves and what they're going through. They're just like, they belittle and berate. The inner critic is running wild. So this like piece around nurturing, it isn't just these little bits of like, dressing nicely and cooking nice foods for yourself. This is like, can I care for myself? Can I look after myself in a way that I would want to look after somebody else? Do I believe that I deserve to be taken care of in the way that I so deeply desire to look after another, or I want another to be treated, or a woman to be treated?
Yeah, and ultimately, but there's two things that I really like about that. Well, actually, I'm going to say three things if I can keep my line of thought. The first thing is, like, when we're really connected to the feminine, there's a sense of fullness, there's a sense of wholeness. Like, when we're nurturing ourselves, it's not just like we're doing these things, because we're told they're good, to have a bath or to take care of ourselves. It fills us up, And from that place, like I'm sure you recognize this, whenever we're nurtured, when we're feeling settled, when we're, if we had a beautiful night with our partner or with a woman, we're feeling that sense of fullness, nurtured, like our roots are like well watered, we fucking wake up next morning and we can take over the world, And so it's also recognizing that this is just the balance of life, like, and that being in this like highly productive state of mind all the time is really unhealthy. It doesn't work, and we need to take that time out. And a lot of the guys that I work with, they find it difficult to switch off. It's like when they're supposed to be on downtime, they're still thinking about work, or they're still thinking about what they have to do, So we are actually supporting ourselves as men to take care of ourselves. But it's part of this, because I relate to what you're saying. It's part of this like programming on men that we shouldn't take care of ourselves. And I think that was put on us by this system, by a capitalist system that was just trying to get us to work harder and faster. And, and I come from a Protestant lineage, like there's so many layers of like Protestant, working mind or a Protestant way of thinking, So there's the programming part. There's also the recognizing that when we really start to tap into the feminine, then we are able to work in a healthier way. Start making, like work hard and then slow down. So it actually supports us. Coming back to the other part around like men's, like what I will say around men's work, there are so many men, especially in Ireland, there are so many men that have been so shamed that the first place that they need to go is get off your fucking knees. So a lot of men do need to go to that place first. They need to find, breath work that's going to get them going, that's going to fill them up, that's going to give them some energy, that's going to give them some balls to be able to get going, So starting those men on the feminine is not a good idea. So it's also about recognizing where a man is at. And for men who, as you say, are hyper successful, they've built massive businesses, but if they can't like take care of themselves and cook themselves a meal, that's unhealthy as well. So we're just talking about balance here, but I'm never going to start, because in Ireland, I think we have the opposite problem. We have too many men who don't have any balls because of shame. And so they have to start there first. We have to get them into their balls, get them into the hara, find their guts, and then build them up from there. So we start at the foundational level. So I think as mentors or as coaches, it's important for us to recognize, that it needs to be adaptable to each individual person. So I do see the functionality of men's work where it's really dealing with that, like focus, clarity, resilience, get up in the morning. We need to have that as well. But when we bring in this other aspect of the feminine, that supports us in a way that we're not even aware of. But when we start to integrate these parts, I'm able to work more efficiently, and I'm also able to rest and enjoy life more, that we're not in this unbalanced state.
Yeah, totally. It also supports people in their vision and what they're trying to create. And also, we kind of touched on in relating, in our capacity to be healthy in relationship and not be either sourcing the energy from our feminine partners, or what I often see as well is kind of pushing down anything that appears feminine in them and belittling and almost being like, I'm superior. The very classical kind of patriarchy relationship where the man is superior to the woman. Yes.
I'm superior to my feelings. I don't need nurturing. And then we project that onto women. And I think that's so hard. Like when I think about it, it hurts my heart because I know I've done that in the past, And a lot of men have this unconscious like inferiority of women, which is again programmed to us. But I love what you were saying before around like that we are basically outsourcing our nurturance from women. And I just, that's more using women. Women have been used for fucking centuries. And this is like a modern kind of version of that, And it's really amazing what you just said. A real insight.
It's like a very subtle way that occurs in relationship. And then a lot of women, they will perpetuate this because they get an energy of being desired and being wanted and being needed, right, in relationship. Like I've met plenty of women who found themselves like, I look after my man, I nurture my man, and they love that. But in fact, at some point they get fed up and sick of it, right? There's like, it's okay for a while and it goes too far, right?
Yes.
And it validates their position of being needed, which we all want in a relationship. We want to feel needed.
Yes.
We want to feel desired. But there's also the fact that it actually becomes too much and it becomes this very like mother-child dynamic.
Yeah. And they end up resenting him. But they're the ones who start. I don't want to do they and whatever. But, you know, like, so our wounds or our shadows are activated in the relationship. And this is the difficulty of this thing. I was speaking about this to a friend the other day. It's like, there is a real beauty in women nurturing men and nurturing our partner and cooking them food. But if that's coming from a place of wanting love, or wanting to be acknowledged, you know, or like from that mother, from the wound of the feminine, then ultimately that will come to the point where she'll end up resenting him, because he'll go into the dynamic of little boy, and then he'll expect all these things, and then for right reason, then she will end up resenting that, you know. And the same with for men. Like, for me, one of the greatest things as a man is to be able to fix things in the house, is to be able to do practical things, is to be able to drive my partner around while she's just like chilling and like watching the world go by. I love that. But again, if I'm doing that from a place of like wanting recognition from her, or wanting her to say that I'm a good man, or wanting to feel good enough, you know, so, and this is where like shadow work comes in. This is where awareness comes in. We really need to be coming back to the body. Where is this coming from? Like, what's my motivation here? And when we do feel resentment of owning our own dynamic, our own part within the dynamic, you know.
And it's such a fine line, you know, because like I see even in my own relationship of being like, okay, you know, now we've had a baby, so, you know, also has to do a lot of nurturing just because of the simple physical mechanics of it. And one of the things we baked into our relationship very early was this appreciation, acknowledgement and appreciation. And even we kind of joke about it between the two of us. It's like, it's very easy for that acknowledgement and appreciation to become like a bait on a hook to lure someone into doing something. Like, oh, you like acknowledgement and validation, so I'm going to acknowledge you and validate you, and then you're going to do the things I want you to do. It becomes a manipulation. Or is it that, you know, I'm just showing like a real awareness and seeing her and what she does, or vice versa, you know, and it just becomes this real fine line, isn't it? You have to, like you said, you have to check in and go, okay, where's this coming from? Like, okay, I'm doing this thing because I've noticed that I haven't been showing up in this way, and when I'm going to do this thing. And then she says, thank you. Then you're like, oh, is she saying, how do I feel about saying thank you? Like, can I take that thank you on? Or was that thank you feeding me to do this thing to get more acknowledgement and validation? And it's a very fine line to dance on.
Absolutely. And we're getting very clever, you know? We didn't know this stuff before, so we couldn't like manipulate each other. We're just getting too clever. We're watching too much Instagram. And I think, you know, just coming back to this original point around polarity, I really feel whenever women do the work around their relationship with their own inner masculine, and I do see women doing this, you know, finding that inner stability within themselves, that inner protector, that inner king, that she's not looking for that in the outside world. I think it really changes her, you know, and that's a lot of work to do, because many women have been impacted with violence, with abuse, with, you know, so much in their own personal lives. You know, so many women have been raped, sexually abused from a young child, you know, right into adulthood. So the trust of the masculine is highly eroded, do you know? And so they end up in relationships then that don't support them in any way, because they end up, you know, their nervous system is set up for attracting men that they're used to, you know? So for a woman really to come to that point of trusting men, she needs to trust her own inner masculine. And that is a lot of work. I think that's so much work. And how we can support then our partners in the relationship whenever those triggers come up, you know, and to say, you know, to be able to like hold space for that and say, listen, I know I haven't done something here, but I know this is a wound that is part of you, is part of your history, is part of your past, and that we hold each other's wounds with care, you know, and understanding that. And that for the similar for men, that we really start to break through this stupid idea that the feminine is weak, that the feminine doesn't have a purpose, that other men are going to slag us off. It's all playground stuff, you know. Oh, he's a pussy, or he's, you know, he doesn't have any balls. And stop shaming ourselves and actually realize that the feminine is our power. She is our, like, my relationship with my body now, my relationship with, because we could go into other things here around porn. Like for me, porn is an addiction to the mother. It's an addiction to sexuality. It's an addiction to pleasure, because we haven't integrated our cocks. We haven't integrated our pleasure into ourselves. So we have this moment of porn or a moment of sexuality that gives us like some sort of sense of life force. When we come into proper healed relationship with our own cocks, with our own sexuality, we're not going, because addiction comes from unhealthiness, you know? There's an unhealthy relationship with our sexuality. There's an unhealthy relationship with our cocks, and it comes out in, you know, all shadow comes out. So it comes out in porn. So it's not about like shutting people down to porn. It's not even about having accountability groups around porn. It's about looking at the root source here, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a disconnection from our feminine, disconnection from our pleasure, our nurturance, our sensuality, our connection to our bodies, our pride in our cocks, you know? And so that's the kind of root cause of this. And I see, this is why I see like addiction so much in society, because it's our only way of regulating ourselves. We're still sucking on the nipple of our mother. We need drugs, we need cigarettes, we need alcohol to soothe ourselves. The cigarette thing, do you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm a victim of this as well. So when we don't have a regulated nervous system, when we're not connected to that kind of nurturance, that groundedness in our own body, then we need these. It's understandable why we're addicted. That's the way I feel about it. And stop going hard on ourselves why we're addicted to these things. Of course we are. We don't get any relaxation in our being. We're not relaxed in our nervous system. Bit of a rant, sorry.
No, man. No, not at all. No need to be sorry. Because it's like, I often talk to men about porn and they're like, oh, you know, and a lot of men have porn addiction, or what they feel is an unhealthy porn use. You know, I use that phrase with a lot of guys as well. And I often ask them, is like, oh, what is it that you seek from getting porn? And long story short, the number of times I speak to men, I ask them this question, it often comes down to they want to try and get to sleep. They want to relax. They want to like disconnect from their thoughts. And I'm always like, okay, so what else have you tried? What else have you tried that works to help you like ground and come back into your body? And it's often they have no answer, because they don't know anything else, right? Or they know that sex can get them there as well, right? They know sex is a way of stress relief and so forth, and coming back into the body. And that, as you said, like feeling what's there, feeling the body, it also leads to feeling the emotions. So this is I wonder if you see this as well. And that's it's almost like men want to feel the pleasure, and to feel pleasure, they don't need to be in their bodies, but they don't really want to feel the emotions that are there, because that's uncomfortable. So like sex with another is great because they don't have to feel their emotions, and porn is great, so they have to feel emotions, but they still don't get that ability to really feel the deepest pleasure, or the deeper pleasure that's access to them.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. You know, in a society that has shut down our emotions, and you know, for me, like when we start to integrate all aspects of ourselves, we can't separate sexuality from our emotions. I feel anyway. You know, it's all in that realm of pleasure, and I think this is what happens. So sexual energy raises up in our body, which is our life force energy. Now, our life force is directly related to our emotions. How our experience of joy, our experience of life, is an emotion. So for those of us who aren't comfortable with our emotions and haven't developed the capacity to be able to be with our emotions or work through our shadows, when the sexual energy comes to a certain point, then we start getting angry, irritated. We start feeling those emotions that we don't want to feel. And as you say, we just got into a habitual pattern. Let's get rid of this energy. You know, now there is pleasure within there, but there's also the release. But every time we do that, we're losing life force energy. We're losing the capacity to experience life through our emotions. So it's a very short vision, shortcut way of dealing with ourselves, of kind of like this, get away this thing so I don't have to deal with it in this moment. And the harder path is to cultivate sexual energy, learn to work through our emotions, like whether that's a therapist or a coach or whatever, or the embodied part, like build up capacity within the pelvis, within the balls, learn how, like the more advanced, learn how to move energy. But then we're not trying to get rid of this energy because we feel uncomfortable. And so I just think that's a really, really key point here, that we, whether we think about society as being a conspiracy or not, it's very convenient that porn is there so that men are throwing their life force away because they haven't learned to navigate our own emotions, because, from the other perspective, we've disconnected from the feminine, So it's hard. I think it's hard work to change all this around. And when I first discovered this idea of ejaculation choice, or at least a choosing when to ejaculate, because up until that point I was ejaculating, 4, 5, 6 times a week. This is in my 30s now, or late 20s. So I spent 2 years. I was like, I'm going to just do this thing and see what happens. 2 years every day masturbating and trying not to ejaculate just to see what would happen. And by fuck, I cried. I cried many, many days. So it's a hard path, and I think it is helpful to have a little bit of I really like maps, to have a little bit of a map. Our sexual energy is in our balls. The testosterone is produced in our balls. Sexual energy comes from this area. So if you can really learn to let that come into the body. And for me, my experience of sex now, I don't really watch porn anymore. I'm not saying I never will again, but not so much anymore. But I feel sexual. I feel sexual in my body. And that's kind of where I wanted to be at for many, many years. Before that, I was just trying to get rid of this energy because it was feeling intense, or I didn't like feeling my emotions. And I think that's where we kind of need to be going with. And we see that in women. Women are able to hold this sexual energy, be radiant, be open, but not act on it and not throw it all over men, or maybe sometimes they do. And because they're more embodied, they have a better understanding of their own body. So that's kind of where I feel like we need to be going. Just building relation. Like the first thing I do with a lot of guys is just like, put your hand on your cock. How do you feel about your cock? 9 times out of 10, it's like, wow, there's a lot of sadness there. Mm-hmm. And that's the first port of call. And from there, then once we start to build relationship with this area of us, then we're not kind of in this compulsive state of trying to get rid of this energy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this capacity, building up and this is where the energetic capacity of both sexual energy and emotions and pleasure, being able to hold and be with it instead of this habitual, I need to get rid of this in whatever way, whether that's, for some people, it's anger expression, whether it's ejaculation. It's like training the body to hold the energy of pleasure, but also in emotional states of like being with a partner who is frustrated with you or angry with you for good reason, and being able to hold the energy of staying grounded and present while listening and engaging and having that conversation, taking responsibility. It's all, for me, and I'll take it for myself, it's all the same. It's all an important process of being able to basically increase our ability in our awareness and presence to hold the energy of life that's running through us, that's occurring. And to make great choices that come from clarity and our chosen path and our kind of deeper consciousness.
Exactly. And, and that is what the masculine is. How do we become big enough containers to be able to hold life itself and women? If we don't have that capacity to be able to hold our own emotions, our own sexuality, our own anger, our own rage, then we definitely can't do that for a woman. And I think that's what women are really wanting from men, is that we have the capacity, and coming back to, the very simple polarity of like, there is a healthiness to men being present, grounded, connected to earth, and able to be in the full spectrum expression of women's energy. Like, I think that that's very attractive to women. And for a man, vice versa, a woman to be connected to her heart, to be nurturing, to be loving, to be radiant. So that, yes, I do believe that this journey of like inner union is important, but also that as men and as women, we have a particular attraction. You know, we have like, I wouldn't say a default system, but as a man, naturally there's an attraction to women. And I know that there are spectrums, and there are some men who are more connected to the masculine, or are, yeah, that we are able to be on that full spectrum between masculine and feminine. But I know from myself, speaking from myself, like I am attracted to a feminine woman, you know? So when we clear away all the bullshit and all the projections and all the expectations and all the father wounds and the mother wounds, that we come back to this simple essence of like what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. And I think that that's different for everyone. And that's why I love the embodiment piece, because we find our own man, we find our own masculinity, we find our own femininity. And that's what it is to be a full human, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes. Beautiful. I love that. You know, the integration, the internal integration. Do
you mind me asking, just, I don't know if
Thomas.
you're intended to finish up. I would love to know, because you're in relationship now, like how do you feel your relationship is with your own feminine, or what has been your journey around that? Because I did share a little bit about mine.
Yeah. I would say for many years of my life, I would have seen the feminine as like, you know, especially if we, you know, not only, but like emotions and pleasure and all those, the kind of things we talked about there, I would have just been like, there's, you know, it's not me. You know, I'm not an emotional person. You know, for many years, I was quite a cold, very logical and so forth person. It's been, my work's really been, especially initially, was to feel more the difficult feelings and emotions. And it was only after kind of that work, and I studied Tantra for a number of years. So a lot of the yoga that we were doing was a lot of would really help me in the masculine work of like structure and holding the pose and being in position, even though there was a little bit of tension and difficulty, but simultaneously doing a lot of heart work, right? And that was really, really beneficial to me. And then I guess now in relationship now, it's been, what's really interesting is, she also probably she'd agree if I said this as she was sitting here, is like when also met me, she felt me as quite, I wouldn't say feminine man, but more feminine that she would have kind of been drawn towards in the past. And I would have probably said to you also, she was quite masculine. She was very business minded, very structured, very ordered in these ways. And so much so, there was some like running jokes we had in our relationship that when we first met, I'd say she was always dressed for a business meeting, you know, and I'd be like, "Oh, are we doing business tonight? What business are we doing?" You know, and like my way of kind of disarming was always through humor and playfulness and fun. And in many ways, it's like we've been able to initiate each other into deeper states of like me masculinity, her femininity, through being together and through supporting each other in that way. So like, you know, she's been on, you know, when we first met, this idea of like feminine retreats and stuff like that would have been like completely foreign to her, you know. There's a lot of bits and pieces that she wouldn't have gone near, but through being with me, and we took her through lots of Tantra bits and pieces, whether together and also in classes and so forth, initiated her into the capacity of being more in her feminine, and me being able to, like, when she struggles or she was falling apart, me just being able to be like, it's okay. Like, it's cool. There's no judgment here. Like, you do you.
Yeah.
And, you know, her supporting me in many ways in my business. Like, you know, if one of my wounds is around being good enough, right? So self-esteem becomes a thing. And then her kind of being this like unerring support and belief in me has like left me kind of more and more, I'm looking for the word, it's not in battle, but that like really imbued me with this like belief. And then I had my own kind of structure and like getting up. This is all something I've been for years, is like, you know, structure in the morning and stuff like that. So it's been a really interesting blend that we've created in our relationship. And then we just had a child. So suddenly you fall into these very traditional roles in many ways.
Yeah.
But then there's these many ways in which, because we're quite fluid together, like one of the things is like, for instance, little Bjorn, all his grooming you know, like I do all his nails, I comb his hair. Like I'm always, not always choosing the clothes, but I do a lot of like clothes choices, and like all the things that we may have traditionally seen as feminines, like come really naturally to me. And like I always really, really enjoy. Whereas also is still very good at organizing and structuring certain things. But so it's just finding this blend in the relationship where the relationship can support us in our growth of our own masculine and feminine, while also kind of calling each other into growth as well, but all doing that in a way that's not, it's never kind of belittling, but can be very challenging sometimes. We can have some very direct challenge. So yeah, that's been, I mean, my journey, and it's still, you know, man, it's still evolving in many ways and
beautiful
and picking things up.
Yeah, and I love what you're talking about, the fluidity. Do you know that we're not like, you know, you're not stuck on being masculine or feminine or whatever, because, you know, I love tomboys as well. I love women who want to get on with shit, not all the time, but I love that. And the more that fluid that we can become in ourselves, and the more we can integrate both these aspects, then we can really support that. And relationships become more interesting. Like I've definitely had relationships where we spiraled through, both of us had a good balance of that. And I think that's really important. And then the other part that you're talking about is like, when we do enough foundational work, when we have practice, when we have like, I don't know, done some basic understanding of shadow work, how to deal with projections, how to deal with triggers, then relationships become interesting. Do you know? We can recognize when something is coming up, and then we can say, okay, well, what's here? You know, it becomes interesting as opposed to, oh, fuck, this thing is happening again. And that's what I love about being a man. Like the masculine side of me is like, have tools, know what to do when a trigger is happening, like recognize the trigger, and then we can really start to navigate these in a bit of a dance, you know, because the reason that triggers and reactions happen is because more of us is trying to come online. I remember doing the MKP weekend once, and there was an Aussie guy, I'm going to do a really bad Australian accent here, just a warning. And he was like, do you know when I get triggered, I get excited. And I remember at the time, because this is like my first year, wasn't bad, I've done worse. It was one of my first years of men's work, and I remember thinking, fuck this guy, like he's talking shit, you know. But he but he was right, because he said, you know, on the other side of a trigger is gold. They're the lost pieces of our shadow that are looking to be seen, and that's why we're being triggered, because there's aspects of our wounding that is looking to be seen. And I think that's the real gift of masculinity for me, you know, both as men as women, that we have we're at that point in society now where we understand ourselves enough, and we have enough tools that we can really start to work with relationships and work with each other to do, you know, as I feel like you are doing, to really navigate relationships well and grow into more of ourselves, so that we're not seeing relationships as like, oh God, my life's over, I'm in a relationship. That is a catalyst for more growth and more knowing of ourselves, and how the relationship itself has its own energetics, you know, it has its own essence. And then it becomes really interesting, you know. So I'm not in a relationship at the moment, but it's like, in the meantime, it's like, I want to get as good as I can in my own healing, my own internal dynamics, and my own like tools as I can, so that I, you know, step into a relationship excited, able to commit, open, knowing that shit's going to hit the fan at some point. But that's part of the course. That's part of the territory. And that's, you know, there's loads of reasons how we can define what a man is, but that's a man for me, is like really when we have this ability to be able to apply ourselves to the world in a healthy way. That's, you know, if there is an essence to the man at all.
Yeah, lead in that way and bring...
Lead in that way, yeah.
Yeah, lead in that way, but also like hold what comes out of that. It's like when you talk about the triggers there, and the Aussie guy, something that's we've cultivated in our relationship, which I think it takes time, is the trust that your partner can just point out, like, you're triggered. Not necessarily these words, you're triggered, because we don't need to say those words to each other anymore. Like we went through a whole phase where I would say to her, I'd look her dead in the eye and I go, I'm not your dad. Also, put a smile on my face, I'm not your dad, because she'd be relating to me, and then she would say to me, David, I'm not your mum. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not questioning you. And I'd be like, oh shit, yeah, I'm not. And now we're at that point where when it comes up, she might say, "Oh, I'm not your dad," and then I'll pretend. I'll be like, "No," I'll still say to me, "I'm not your mum," and then I'll pretend to be a little boy, and we can like have real fun with it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's taken time to get, and it's trust.
Sure.
When
Trust.
you really trust your partner has your best interests at heart, and I think that's something that
Yeah.
some people really struggle with in relationship, is like believing that their partner is pointing out something about them and they're like, they're not doing this to belittle me or to hurt my ego or to say that I'm not good enough. They're doing this because they want the relationship to be better, and they want me to be bigger and more of me and less of my fear and my
Yeah. And I think for men that's a really big key, because we do get criticism and judgment, and for us to go into little boy every time, we're really not going to get anywhere. And I think that's really beautiful. It's like, what is it may come across as judgment, but like really just feeling into like what's behind that. And as you say, it's like, this person loves me, she wants more from me, she sees potential in me, and I know that's a whole thing in itself, but she wants more from this relationship. And again, we're coming back to the gifts of the masculine and the feminine. And I know John talks about this a lot as well, of just like the feminine evoking men. And I know I had that experience. Like, that's part of my journey, was being in this last relationship where she pissed me off so much that something awoke in me. Something awoke in me, in my belly, in my hara, in my guts, that I had never experienced before. And I love just to go back into the sacredness of relationship, that there is a sacredness behind everything, and drop this idea that relationships are the end, or do you know what I mean? It's like relationships are like the destination of life. Sacred relationships are like where we want to be. It's how life was set up. When we approach relationship, not with a like fucking rose tinted glasses, but just with that inherent sense of like two people coming together in love, is an incredibly beautiful experience. And stop, because I feel like we have quite negative, like I have negative because my parents' relationship was really awful. And so that became the template for how I understood relationship. I was like, I don't want to get into a relationship like that. So that we really bring it back to like these, although we may not have experienced it, that there is, the sacred idea of the sacred polarity, the masculine, the feminine, the Shiva, the Shakti, however we want to define it, that these men and women, that we are designed to dance together, or men, or women are women. It doesn't really matter. But that these two energies were designed to dance together. And then even on shit days, we can trust life, and I think that that's one of the greatest things I've learned over time, is that and life is inherently good, even whenever they're having shit days, whenever like relationships are bad, or whenever the fucking shadows are coming up, or life is inherently life-giving, it's inherently good. And I'm going to use an example here. Like, people say that the earth would be better off without humans on it, because at least it would go back to normal. And I think that's one of the most disheartening things to hear, because I think that we are sacred humans. We are sacred men and sacred women, and we have so many gifts to give to the world and to each other. But we've been sold a very short story here, and we've all been colonized, And I think it's going to be a long, long journey to get back to what it is to truly be a human. And I think that inner union is part of that journey, but the bigger part is to integrate both like this masculine sky and the feminine earth. Like, that's the biggest split for me. When they removed men from the land, when they killed the witches, when they used the enclosures to separate men from the land, this is the biggest battle that we have. And I know that we have practical day-to-day stuff, earning money, feeding baby, taking care of wife. But I always hold on to that bigger macro picture of like, we were just disconnected from the land. That's the original wound here. And for me, whether it's true or not, that's our way back.
Yeah. Yeah. And just as you said that, I flashed, it's like, and so many cultures have been disconnected from the land in very similar ways, And it's this piece that I learned for myself. I wasn't really one for nature, shall I say. I spent some time traveling about 8 years ago, And it was only then that I started to really fall in love with what I really loved was beaches. And it sounds so simple, but I love to sit by a beach, and I got no business sunbathing, but I love to sit on a beach and listen to the waves and feel the sand in my feet. Or I love to be in a jungle and hear the sounds of the jungle and all these things. And it's something I've really taken with me out of that and spent a lot of time in the forest. Even now, this morning, I took my little boy Bjorn. I take him pretty much kind of 2 or 3 mornings a week, and I take him to the forest and we walk through the forest, and I narrate the different bits and pieces that we see and the trees and the birds. Is actually to spend time with nature and listen to nature, opposed to the thoughts in our own minds, and just see what that does to your mind, see what it does to how you feel, because I can guarantee it will shift something in you if you do it regularly. Like just feeling the nature, listening to it, and just being present with it, it will shift something for you, because that's, as you're saying, that's what we've been taken away from. We've been put into the offices and factories that have these mechanical sounds and always something else to do. But when we bring ourselves to the nature, the land, the forest and the seas, it has a very, very different vibration, and how that nourishes us in a way is very different to our city lives.
Absolutely. And we evolved with nature. We evolved with the bird song. We evolved with the sun in the sky. We evolved with the moon. We evolved with the plants, with trees, like to put your hand on a tree, to listen to the bird, the circadian rhythm. Like science, fortunately, is starting to catch up with what people have, indigenous cultures always knew, the circadian rhythm, the necessity of the darkness on our internal system, and like putting our feet on the ground, like the necessity of like discharging positive ions into the earth, and how there's a relationship. And so, it's recognizing this is fundamental to us. And actually, one little thing around this, I always notice on the days that I am feeling uncomfortable or don't want to feel, I don't take my shoes off. And this is the power of being connected to the earth, because we don't feel. So it's understanding that the earth herself is a feeling body, and when we connect to the earth, it activates parts of us. It activates really deep parts of us that activate us into being full humans. Like, the great thing about polarity for me is like the recognition that we can be as successful as we want. We can be as fucking masculine as we want, and be as tender as like I'm highly sensitive. And for years, I didn't really want to admit that, from my own shame. But now I really see it as a superpower, and my level of sensitivity, how I feel, how I experience people, even over Zoom. Like a lot of my work is about feeling people. And so that we by embracing the I wouldn't say duality, because duality is separate, but embracing the polarity of life, all of the possibilities of the masculine, all the possibilities, we become so much more as humans. And I think that's important. So then connecting to nature makes us more visionary, actually. It makes us more able to, do those masculine things that we fucking love. So that's what I've really noticed. The more I kind of navigate both aspects of self, the more I get to experience of both aspects of self. It's like the tree of life, the big branches up above, and then the roots in the ground, and the branches can only grow as high as the roots go low, which I think is just summarizes so much of this. And it's beautiful that you're bringing your son into nature every day so that he gets to integrate these templates into his body.
Yeah. I was just thinking of the tree of life as you described there, and I haven't really read it in that way, that the two sides. I think we'll stop there, because I feel like we will just keep going for the next 4 hours until it's dark outside.
Right. Yeah.
But it's been such a beautiful conversation to really like riff on these wonderful topics, and these topics that are so close to home for both of us. And I imagine the listeners are listening and they're wanting to know where they can hear more from you. And I know you've got, you work with men in both like one-to-one capacity and also in groups.
Yeah. Yeah, so I suppose the easiest way of getting in touch, I don't have a website at the moment, is on Instagram. So it's _Niall_Graham_. And I also have a podcast, the Niall Graham podcast, which is a very original title. There's about 11 episodes on there. And I do go into aspects around the feminine on that as well. And yeah, you're just really welcome to reach out to me in any way. I am also starting a container called The Path of Sacred Kingship on the 2nd of September. I have 4 places left for that, which is a 12-week online course to integrate the masculine and the feminine. And it was like, it's me creating the initiation that I never got. I have another woman called Michaela who works with the womb, and she's bringing all of us men through an initiation of the feminine as well. So the first month is initiating the masculine, like we talked about on this call, getting us off the fucking ground. Second month then is about initiating to the feminine, doing that cutting of the cords of the mother wound, working through our relationship with the feminine, integrating the feminine. And then the last month then is just about really working with this inner union piece. And then we have an in-person then in Ireland in December. So this is kind of like a culmination of the last 25 years of work kind of coming into this like inner union piece that I feel is really important. And that's it. And thank you so much. It's been, such an amazing conversation. And just the commonality, I suppose, of our own backgrounds was really beautiful for me to experience. And yeah, thank you so much for letting me go on my mad, ranty, passionate tangents.
No, it's my pleasure, man. It's a wonderful conversation, man. Really beautiful.
Yeah.
We really weaved and danced through all these important things of the outer union, the inner union, and what blocks us and what gets in the way, and how society and culture and society as at large has got in that way. But yeah, man, thank you. I know we've just like run over time and everything's just flown, but it's been such a pleasure to record this with you.
Thank you so much, mate.
Welcome. And listeners, if you're listening to this, all Niall's links will be in the show notes down below. And if you're listening to this and you think there's someone in your life that could really benefit from this, right? You know, I know a lot of women like to listen to the podcast, and you're often asking about your partners. This is a sort of conversation where you listen to the podcast on your own and you go, hey, I listened to this great podcast. I think it'd be really great for us. You listen to it together. Yeah, not you send it over the wall to him. Listen to it together, long car ride or whatever. And you just talk about the concepts like pause. Me and also used to do this all the time. We'd listen to podcasts together and we'd pause at certain points and discuss what we hear. You know, just a suggestion. I recommend this to couples I often work with. Or you can send it to a friend of yours. Maybe there's a guy in your life that it'd be really useful for. But please do share the love. But I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. And I say thank you. And ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. You know, it's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. You know, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually you could really do with this, please share it with them. You know, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you know, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.